I went to say goodbye to the mother in the kitchen, and I saw the half-eaten, remains of the dog that I'd run over, and I realised what I'd been eating for 4 days.
In 1982, with only 2,500 pounds, this lady set off on a motorcycle for an adventure of a lifetime. This is the story of Elspeth Beard's 2-year-long, 35,000-mile dream road trip around the world. The first British woman to ride solo around the world in 1982 on her 1974 BMW R66. That bike now, today, it's 50 years old, right?
Yeah.
50. It's 50 years old to the year, this year. Right. So, Elspeth, it's lovely to meet you, and thank you very much for doing this with us. I'll just ask you a few questions and you can answer as you feel free. So, how did you get into motorcycling?
Well, it was a kind of accident, to be honest. I got expelled from school when I was 16, and I ended up going to a crammer in London to finish off my A-levels.
Okay.
And when I was at this crammer, I met this group of motorcyclists. And that's really when I first became, or was my introduction to motorcycling. So I bought my first bike in 1979, which was a little Yamaha YB100, 100cc. And it was just for transport to get around London. It was a simple, easy way to get cheap, efficient, fast way to get around London. But after a year of that, I got a little bit bored. And so I thought I'd buy myself a slightly bigger bike. And I bought myself a Honda 250. And then about a year after that, I got a bit bored of that. So I bought myself my BMW 60/6, which I bought in 1979. And it was actually this bike that I suddenly realised the travelling potential of a motorbike. You could go places on this bike. So I did little trips around. I think my first trip was Scotland, and then I went around Ireland. And then in 1980, I went around Europe with a friend of mine. And so I was gradually building up. The trips were getting longer and longer, and I was sort of building up my confidence. And I decided I loved to travel, and I loved to travel on a motorbike.
When was the first time that you thought about doing a round the world trip on your motorcycle? I mean, when was that seed sown? When did that first idea that this is something I could do?
Well, I didn't know I could do it, to be honest. I think in the early 1980s, the world seemed a much, much larger place. Obviously, there was no internet, no social media, and it was much more difficult to find out about countries in the world. And so, but it was actually when I was traveling across America. So in 1981, I flew out to Los Angeles, and I bought myself a BMW 750, an old, really old 750. And I rode it from the west coast to the east coast. And it was somewhere on that journey, probably riding through the deserts in Arizona or something, that I had this slightly crazy thought, thinking, I actually remember thinking, I wonder whether it's possible to ride a motorbike around the world. I didn't even know whether it was something that could be done. And so this slight thought came into, I wonder whether it's possible to ride a motorbike all around the world.
That was your first thought?
That was the first time.
Okay. So, of course, this is much easier to do today, to ride around the world with digital information, with the internet and credit cards and electronic money. It must have been a daunting task to even plan a trip like this. I mean, in the 80s, where did you start? And how did you prepare yourself for this motorcycle trip? Once you decided that I'm going to do it, how did you go about it?
You couldn't really plan in those days. It was because you just had to kind of do things as you went along. I mean, I prepared myself the best I could before I left. I mean, one of the first things I did was to teach myself as much as I could about my bike, because I knew in a lot of the countries I was going to go to, I wouldn't find anybody who had ever seen a BMW. They wouldn't be able to fix it. So everything that everything that was going to be done, and servicing her and looking after her and fixing her, I was going to have to do. So I bought myself a Haynes manual, and I bought myself some basic tools, and I just taught myself. I just took it apart and learnt about it.
So you took your bike apart before you left,
Well,
just to learn.
I mean, I stripped the cylinders down, and so I learned, and I replaced all the gaskets, the seals, the oil seals. I put new cables on it, new battery, new tires, obviously. I mean, I just wanted to get my bike in the best condition I could get her in before I started, because when I left in 1982, she was already 8 years old, and she had already done 45,000 miles. So she was a fairly well-used bike at the beginning, before I even left. So I wanted to do as much to her and get her in the best condition I could get her into, in the comfort of my home and my garage, rather than trying to fix her on the side of the road.
Okay, from your book, The Lone Rider, I know that it was a relatively easy ride across America, but Australia was altogether another game, right? So how was it riding across Australia?
When I got to Australia, I basically had to earn some money. So I left the UK with £2,500. That's all I had. And I knew it wasn't going to be enough money to get all the way around. So I always intended to either work in New Zealand or in Australia to save some more money to carry on my trip. Again, I didn't really know how it was going to work. You, as I said, in those days, you couldn't plan things the way that you can now. So I arrived in Sydney, and I did 2 jobs in Sydney, and I worked there for 6 months. And then I set off around Australia. And for some reason, I kind of thought Australia was going to be easy. I don't know. I have no idea why. Riding into the sunset and beautiful roads. And I think it's a very harsh country. The outback is very, it's very hot. You got the dust, you got the flies, you got the kangaroos, you got the road trains, you got the floods. And the roads were terrible. And to add to all that, the distances were so vast. So I was riding 400 or 500 miles every day, and it was just exhausting.
You rode from one end of Australia, from Sydney to Perth, right?
Yes, I did. Well, I rode from Sydney all the way up the west coast, then across to the Northern Territory, then down the middle of Australia to Port Augusta, and then all the way across the Nullarbor across to Perth. So I did go a very long way, and I went a very long way around. But it was just mentally and physically one of the hardest countries. And maybe because I hadn't sort of prepared myself for it mentally, I sort of had this strange idea it was going to be sort of easy and fun, and actually it was a real endurance test. And it was hard work.
But in Singapore, you were robbed of all your belongings, right? So in a time when there's no internet, when there's no credit cards, when all your money is physical, how do you know what to do when you're just stripped bare of all your belongings? What do? You lost your passport, you lost your bike keys, you lost your bike papers, and you lost all your money. What did you do? And wasn't it overwhelming to just leave everything and fly back home at that time?
No. Well, that wasn't actually an option in those days, because I was traveling with a motorbike. I couldn't actually leave my bike anywhere and fly home. I was sort of chained to this bike, and it was odd because I always thought of my bike as something that gave me freedom and independence, but it did start on the round the world trip to become something I was sort of chained to, and it stopped me from, I couldn't go home, I couldn't leave it anywhere. So it was never an option for me just to say, oh, I've had enough, I'm going home now, which is probably a good thing, because it didn't cross my mind once in the entire trip. You know, that's it, I finished, I've had enough, I'm ill, or I've had an accident. But yeah, so when I was in Singapore and I had everything stolen, it was, so most of my money was in traveller's checks. So, and I was quite good at keeping all the numbers and whatever. So the first thing I did is I went to the British Embassy, who I have to say were completely hopeless and very unhelpful. And I think I was about the fifth person who'd turned up that day complaining that they'd been robbed. So I went, and so the first thing I had to do was to get a new passport, because if you don't have a passport, you can't do anything. So the first thing I did was to get a new passport. Then with the passport, I got my traveller's checks replaced. I was very lucky. The place I was staying were very nice, and they said they understood, and they said that's fine. Sort yourself out, and then you can pay us when you've got your money replaced. But then the other problem was that all my visas for my countries I was yet to visit, they were all stolen in my old passport. So I then had to go and get new visas for Thailand and Malaysia and India and all these countries I was planning to visit. So I think I was stuck in Singapore for 6 weeks, just replacing everything. And then all my bike documents, I had to deal with the Department of Vehicles in Swansea in Wales, all the way from Singapore, by fax or phone, and of course it was 10 hours difference, the time difference, and it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And then my key, I think I managed, I did have a spare key, so I managed to get another one cut. But yeah, it was just...
So this is an interesting question. How was it to ride through India in 1983, being a blonde woman on a big motorcycle? I mean, you can go no holds bar on the frustration you felt at the bureaucracy, the red tape and the stairs. I mean, just give it to me as it is, the lowdown.
I think the thing in India that I really struggled with was the curiosity of the people. I mean, I have to say, I never felt in danger, and I never felt threatened. It was just in 1983, in most parts of India, or I think in all of India, they had never seen a BMW motorbike before, especially the rural countryside. They'd never seen a BMW motorbike before. And, I'd turn up in these kind of places, and they'd look at this huge bike, and it's got these sort of strange engines sticking out the side, and then I had these aluminium top box, and that was kind of, what's all that about? And then I'd take my helmet off, and it was ridden by a woman. Their eyes were out on stalks. They just could not believe what they were seeing. And so I was kind of relentlessly followed around. I would stop the bike and within a minute I'd have 50 people around me. And they were all men. They were very, you just didn't really see many women on the streets then. So they were all men, and it was just, I don't know, it really started, I mean, the first month I was kind of okay, and I sort of managed to, but then it really started to get to me, and I found it mentally every day I used to, breathe deeply in the morning and go, right, off we go again. Yeah, it was very, and then I think all the bureaucracy, and I was also there when it was the hot season, just before the monsoon, so it was like really hot in the south. It was 40 degrees. I got very ill in India. So when you're trying to deal with all that, your temper, you lose your temper much more easily when you're ill and you're hot and you're bothered and you've got all these people around you. So I did find it extremely difficult.
And how was it to ride in India during those days in 1982?
Chaotic, very, very chaotic.
The ride from Calcutta to Kathmandu?
Slow, very slow, very chaotic. I mean, I don't think I'd ride for weeks and I don't think I'd get out of second or third gear. Everything was slow. And
The buses.
well, the buses, everything. There was everything on the road. Cyclists, chickens, camels, cows, people, buses, lorries, everything. I mean, it was all just crazy, crazy.
And then you went up to Ladakh.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
believe you loved Ladakh, right?
I did. I loved Ladakh, mainly because it was empty and there weren't many. It was beautiful, and there weren't many people there, and it was high in the mountains, and I love mountains. I love being high up in the mountains.
The cover picture on your book, that's from Ladakh, right?
The cover, yes, it is.
It is. It's
yeah.
just outside Leh.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. It is.
I know that place. I mean,
Yeah.
it's instantly recognizable.
Yeah.
And also, could you talk us through your ride from Srinagar to Leh, that harrowing ride from Srinagar up the Jojila to Dras, through Kargil and to Leh?
Yeah, because by this stage, I'd actually met up with a Dutchman, but by this stage, so we met in India. We actually met in Kathmandu, but we started riding together. I think we met at a campsite in Agra, and so we rode together around Rajasthan and then up through Srinagar to Leh. And by this stage, my bike was becoming a challenge to keep going. Every single day there was something I needed to fix or fit or mend, and the brakes on my bike were never that great, to be honest. I mean, I've got drum brakes front and back, and the front brakes have always been crap, terrible front brakes. Crap. And they're still crap. Doesn't matter what I do to them, they're rubbish. And the back brake actually is okay, but the problem with the back brake is that there's an oil seal between the bevel, the oil in the bevel, and the oil seal had failed, and so I had oil going from my bevel into my brake shoes. So my back brake was about 50%, and we had to go through over these terrifying mountain passes. And I remember the weather wasn't great. The roads were it was all just dirt road, and I daren't touch my front brake, because if I touched it, either it didn't work at all or it just completely locked the front wheel and you just went, head over the bike. So I had to literally ride using my gears the whole time, just slowing myself down with the gears and then using whatever back brake I could stamp on to get something out of it. So it was quite a terrifying ride.
So when you did this trip, today most people do this trip, they have some kind of sponsorship, they're doing it for a cause, so they have a means to an end. But you did it absolutely for yourself with no sponsorship at all. I believe you also wrote to
Bike magazine.
You wrote to Bike magazine, and they laughed you off as a joke. In fact, they were quite rude.
Very rude.
Right? So you did this trip on your own money, and you were on quite a tight budget. So what was the most ridiculous accommodation you stayed at and the most ghastly food you had to make do with? How you had to make do to stay on that shoestring budget?
I was incredibly tight with my money, because what I carried in my money belt was it. That's all I had. And because my parents hadn't been particularly encouraging, should I say, before I left, I was I was determined I was not ever going to ask them for money or help. So I had to get home with what I had. So I was ridiculously careful with every cent or penny or rupee or whatever was, you know, I'd make a note of exactly how many rupees I'd spent every day. And so we used to, well, when I started to travel with you know, Robert again in India, we used to camp a lot, and that was free, so that was good. We used to buy food from the market and cook our own food. We had a little petrol, and we used to make our own food. So we lived incredibly cheaply. I can remember, you know, I think I used to live off 2 or 3, you know, rupees a day. That was it, excluding petrol.
Rupees or dollars?
No, rupee. I mean, it was because it was just food. I mean, not including petrol, because petrol was a fixed cost, so that didn't. But I mean, if we camped, it was free, so we didn't pay for our you know, accommodation. We'd just buy fruit and veg at the market, and that was it.
There were also some times when you'd meet people and they say, come and stay with me, or sometimes for the security of your bike, you'd wheel it into places. And so, I mean, they're not hotels, they were just, sometimes you just stay at garages or sheds or...
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, my main concern actually is, slightly oddly, I was more concerned about my bike than I was about myself. When I was looking for sort of somewhere to stay at night, I would always think of my bike first. And as long as my bike was either safe, I could get it off the street, I could get it in the guest house, you know, lobby area, or I could take it into my room with me. So I didn't really care what bed I slept on or whether I was comfortable or not. As long as my bike was safe, that was my priority.
And how was it to ride through Pakistan and Iran?
Well, by the time, because it took me about 6 weeks to get out of India, so my visa to Iran was about to expire. So I had to kind of race through Pakistan. So I think I rode across Pakistan in about 2.5 weeks. It was pretty quick. Pakistan was, well, after India, Pakistan felt very different. It was had a very different feel to it. It you know, I tended to get hassled a lot more by men in Pakistan than I did in India. I mean, India I had a lot of men around me, but I felt they were just curious. Whereas in Pakistan, I found it was slightly different. And then Iran, Iran was at war with Iraq. So sort of riding through a country that was at war was not easy. But we were only given a 7-day transit visa. So we literally just shot through Iran. I got hepatitis in the middle of Iran. So Robert literally had to carry me and put me on my bike in the mornings and sort of push me off. And I would just try and kind of ride all day, and because I was so weak and feeling so ill. And also by this time, my clutch was starting to wear out. So yes. I was riding the bike with clutchless gear changes. So apart from initially pulling off, I didn't use the clutch at all. So I had no front brake, a pretty rubbish back brake. I had a clutch that was about to run out. I had no headlight. My indicators, I think, stopped working in Australia. I can't even remember them. I didn't have a tail light. I don't think I had a brake light, actually. So, you know, my bike was certainly showing signs of wear.
And then you rode through Baluchistan.
And then Baluchistan was really tough because there was no road there then, because the main overland route had been through, you know, Afghanistan. But because Russia had invaded Afghanistan, the country was closed. And so the main overland route suddenly just moved south through the deserts of Baluchistan. So we had a very, it was about 300 miles of just desert, and we just had to follow tracks and things through the desert. So that was one of the toughest parts of the trip, actually.
And then you rode through Iran just, I think, was it 4 years after the revolution happened? The 4 years?
Yeah.
So how was that? How was...
Iran was a very interesting but very strange country. So obviously you had the war going on, so there were lots of soldiers and all this stuff on the roads, but there was a very you sort of felt that the people were very sort of afraid, but they were actually one of the kindest, most friendly people I think I met on the whole trip. They were incredibly, but it was almost they were frightened of being seen to be friendly towards a Westerner. So, for example, I would go to a cafe or whatever to have a coffee, and I would sit down on one of the tables outside, and the owner would come out and go, no, go, and he'd sort of tell us to go away because he didn't want foreigners to be seen sitting at his cafe, because he thought he'd get into trouble. And then he'd look around nervously as if hoping that nobody had seen us there. And then just as we were leaving, he'd sort of say, round the back. And so we'd go round the back, in the back door, and then we'd have lunch with his whole family. So they obviously wanted to be kind and hospitable and welcoming, but they were almost frightened to do so because of the secret police, or I don't know. So it was a strange country to travel through.
On this trip, you had two major crashes, one in Australia and one in Thailand. So, and there were major crashes. The bike was completely bashed up and stuff like that. So, what did you do? What did it feel like?
You just had to get on with it. You didn't have a choice.
What happened for the two crashes?
So, well, in Australia, I was out on a dirt road. Fortunately, I'd met up with this other motorcycle, which had Tom and Ewan were on. Tom was English, Ewan was a Kiwi. And I was very, very lucky I was travelling with them. So we were on a dirt road in Queensland, and my whole front wheel just went into a huge pothole, and then the whole back of the bike flipped over. So I cartwheeled down the road, and I ended up, I had concussion. The whole front end of my bike was completely smashed. The forks were bent, the handlebars. But I went to hospital for about a week, I think, and then but Australia was relatively easy to fix because they had BMW dealerships. I mean, they didn't have many, but they had. So I managed to order some new handlebars. I changed the handlebars from low bars to high bars because I thought that would be easier on the dirt roads. I think Tom managed to straighten sort of straighten my forks out. They're still not straight, but it's fine. It's fine. And then I just sort of fixed my bike, and then got back on it, and off I went again. But you didn't. Thing is, time wasn't a problem for me. I had all the time in the world. If I spent 5 years going around the world, it didn't matter. My limiting thing was my money. That was my limiting thing. So if I had to hold out in some youth hostel in Queensland and fix my bike or fix myself or get better, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was how much it was costing me. So and then in Thailand, so I went right up to the northern Thailand, and I tried to get through Burma to India. But I couldn't because the country was closed. So I ended up riding all the way back down to Thailand, back down to Malaysia, to Penang, to take a boat across to India. And it was on that thing that I I hit this dog, this huge dog, just ran out from behind a truck. And so I came off and I slid up the road and my panniers were ripped off. So I had to, but fortunately it happened right outside this Thai farm and the family were fantastic. So they all came out and they helped me get my bike out of the ditch, and I ended up staying with them a week, kind of, you know, because I was all bruised, and I broke my toe, and so I needed to kind of recuperate somewhere. And I also had to do some work on my bike.
And then you had a surprise at the end with the food you were eating.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah. So then on the last day, I went to go and see to say goodbye to the mother in the kitchen, and I saw the half-eaten, you know, remains of the dog that I'd run over, and I realised what I'd been eating for 4 days. But they were incredibly. I mean, you know, they took me in. I was a total stranger. Looked after me, fed me, helped me with my bike, got me going again, and off I went again. So I was very lucky.
So this ride had its share of hardships. It was no joyride for sure. Okay. So do you think it completely changed you as a person? Do you think the 40 years since, from 84 to now, would have been very different if you hadn't done this ride?
Completely. The 2 years was very pivotal in my life. Very pivotal. I learned so much about everything, you know, myself, my limits, what I could do. The key thing was realizing what you're capable of. And you only realize what you're capable of if you are prepared to put yourself out there and test yourself and challenge yourself. And I think most people have, you know, can do so much more than they realize, because when you have to do it, you have to survive. You just find a way. And I think when you've done that time and time again, you realize that there's nothing you can't do. You can tackle anything, nothing's a problem. And it gives you this real sense of, you know, you totally believe in yourself, that, you know, you take on projects, you take on, I mean, I bought this old, you know, Victorian water tower, which, you know, I never would have taken on had I not, you know, having the courage and the because everybody said, oh, you'll never get the permits to, you know, to convert it into a house. Never been done before. It's not possible. Much like I was told when I left on my round the world trip, you know. And I just thought, yes, I will. I mean, it didn't cross my mind that I wouldn't do it, and I knew I would succeed. And I think if you persevere, and you're determined and you don't give up, I think you can achieve anything you want to.
So how many days and how many miles?
Well, it was just over 2 years. I think it was 2 years and 2 months, and I did just over 35,000 miles.
Last question. Have you ever been to India again, or would you like to visit India again? A lot has changed in the 80s and for the better. You've been to India again, right?
I have been to it. Actually, I went back to India. Although when I finally managed to get out of India and crossed into Pakistan, which was a whole story in itself, because it was when it was the storming of the Golden Temple in Amritsar, so the whole of the Punjab state was closed to tourists, and the bureaucracy, and told to get permits that didn't exist. And so after 6 weeks of that, finally managed to get out of India. And I vowed I would never go back. That was it, never go back. But in 2003, I went back because I was doing a round the world motorcycle trip. Well, I was helping a friend of mine who runs tours, and we took 23 motorcyclists around the world. And then we went to, and we picked up Enfields, and then we rode from Chennai through Bangalore, Mangalore, up to Bombay. And I have to say, I mean, I think the southern part of India is a bit more chilled out than the north. And I think all the bit that I had done when I was on my round the world trip was all this kind of very industrial, populated sort of northern belt from Calcutta to Delhi, which was really hard work. So it was kind of nice to see a different, and plus the fact 25 years had gone past. So, you know, a lot had already changed. And I understand now a lot has changed again, and they have beautiful roads in India. So,
So do you think festivals like Generation Speed will help people or inspire them to do trips, long distance trips, trips where you put your trust into one motorcycle or one motor car and go beyond borders and stuff like that? Do you think a lot of people are inspired by your story and want to go and do this kind of stuff?
hopefully it makes people realize that anything's, you know, the only things that limit what you do is your you know, because you don't want to fail. People don't want to fail, so they don't try. And I think it's all there to be done. There's an amazing world to be seen. Traveling by motor, or traveling in general, is, you know, is so important for people to see the world, to meet people, to understand different cultures. It's what will, you know, it's so important that we all travel as much as we can.
Thank you, Elspeth. That was lovely. I mean,
All right.
it's great, really fabulous.
Good.
Good.
Good. Good.